Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, December 6th, 2023. Time to move on to yet another show. Plenty happening as usual, but also nothing. So, I don't know. Reconcile that strange dichotomy in your head. Things are happening. I don't know. And I'll pick up on the hints from Justice, as a matter of fact. Why don't we try it that way, since everything is working? Yes, just immediately before the show, word came that Norman Lear, a television legend, Norman Lear, has died at the age of, I think, 101. So all of the centenarians, I guess, passed. Well, that will happen, of course, with centenarians. If I've got the word right. But hit 100 years old, and, well, it could happen anytime. Also, I happen to also have heard just recently that if you're a Howard Stern radio listener fan, that longtime Stern show personality, is it Sorella? Ralph Sorella has died as well. He's not 100. He was just 58, so that was a bit of a surprise, I think. But I don't know how many people follow that. But Norman Lear, everybody knows, and everybody knows his work. So that of some interest. Oh, what's your other note here? Am I getting from this, is Taylor Swift the person of the year, Time Magazine person of the year? Is that what's going on? All right. Well, they still do that, I guess, over at Time Magazine. There's still, I guess, technically a Time Magazine. But why not? I guess, I mean, Taylor Swift, I don't know, something of a phenomenon, certainly. Okay, you know, why not? Honestly, the other major contenders for person of the year, it's very often a negative thing, like here's the biggest jerk of the year. So that's fine. She certainly occupied more column inches in the newspapers than most people, even though, you know, it's an entertainment thing. But, you know, there was lots of interesting, a lot of societal issues swirling around her persona. So, yeah, not the worst choice I can think of, certainly. And, you know, a lot of interesting things. Not only, of course, the fact that for her to date somebody warrants like nationwide comment, but also the controversy about her ownership of her own music and having to put out all her own old songs and re-record them and remaster them because of strange copyright. It's a fairly major thing. So why not? Everybody likes her, I think, except right-wing extremists for some reason are angry with her these days. They used to like her because they thought she was some sort of weird Aryan prototype, but then she turned out to be a normal human being underneath it all and didn't like that stuff, and now they hate her. So I guess I'm for her. Why not? Okay, pleasant enough, and lots of people will be happy. I'm sure they'll actually sell, well, do they have copies of the magazine to sell? Maybe they'll sell posters of some kind. I don't know, someone will sell something. Anyway, plenty of other things going on. Greg already assembling his raft of stories as I look through my inboxes in various places. Let's see. One, here's Mighty OCD saying that we're live and on the air. That's important for us to know. I'm glad you told us. Thank you, and we'll help you tell others. Sometimes this happens over at Mastodon, sometimes over at Blue Sky. Every day over at Twitter. Justice handles that, but I don't go there anymore, so I don't have the opportunity to retweet him. But he gets first crack at what goes on the show in the morning anyway. That's a pretty powerful position as it is. All right, my inbox in the email, The Hill has emailed me 500 times to tell me various things that are going on. And if it wasn't for their email, this is why I don't stop them. If it wasn't for their email, I wouldn't know that there was a Republican debate coming up tonight. Because I don't care. But apparently that's happening. I guess as a prelude to it, also, I missed this one, except for people complaining about the content of it in the 8 o'clock hour this morning. Sean Hannity hosted a town hall with Trump in Iowa. because you know how it is with Iowa and voting and election years. That's one of the things that they're going to do soon, and whatever. And I don't know. So lots of people reacting to that one because apparently, I guess the take I saw on it was Sean Hannity tried to hand Trump a softball way to say, I'm not going to be a dictator if I win my second term. And he wouldn't. He didn't recognize what was going on and wouldn't take it, and basically said, but I am going to be a dictator. But I think he said, I'm only going to be a dictator on day one, only on the first day of my administration. And you know how it is with dictatorships. The ratchet always works in reverse. You grab power, you start using the military against your domestic enemies, but then on day two, you start saying, no, I'm going to correct course in the other direction. That never happens, but all right, well, that's of some interest as well, and there'll be people talking about that, no doubt, and Greg Dworkin may even be one of them. And we can, because Skype is working well, and I remembered at the last second to test it, and make this Skype test call while our prelude music was running. I don't know whether that streams over the air or not. But at any rate, it's working. So's Greg. We put 2 and 2 together. We get 4. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Hey, good morning.
Hey.
So look, if you're going to talk about Trump's plans on day one, you have to start before day one.
Well, okay then. Is that day 0 or day -1?
Day negative, whatever. Since we're talking about Tommy Tuberville, definitely a negative.
Oh, yeah.
Tommy Tuberville caved, and all of the line officers that are not generals, I think there's like 18 of them or 11 of them or something like that. Everybody else gets their promotion.
Yay.
In other words, he failed. He got nothing for what he was trying to do.
Yes, I guess.
And Biden's calling him out on it and say this is a complete waste of time and you just ruined people's lives for no good reason. And good for him, good for Biden, and bad for Tuberville. But there were some other interesting things, I think, to say about Tuberville that are worth repeating. They've been said before. They're not new insights by me, but they're important.
Censorship in any way, or? I mean,
well, one of the important things from somebody who had been in the military pointed out on Daily Kos this morning in the pundit roundup when I mentioned that Tuberville was caving.
Yes,
is that he's really ruined a lot of families in not irrevocably in some cases or irrevocably
yes, I see.
Permanently, but in some ways just really bad stuff. For example, if you were supposed to have a promotion,
he's a homewrecker,
but you didn't have it,
right?
What happened to your spouse who told their job they were quitting in order to move, but didn't? And then also, what do you do with the aged family member who you were going to put in a care facility, except you didn't know where?
Right.
And all of that stuff got held up and messed up. And so you can get your promotion now, but you can't undo that damage.
Yes.
So it's just worth It's just worth highlighting what a rotten person Tuberville is. The other side of the coin.
That was worth pointing out because not everybody realized. Well, so something got delayed. Big deal. No, there it is. And I think most people can figure that out. But that was great to point out the concrete examples.
Yeah. The other side of the coin is that the conspiracy theory lives on.
No. That
Tuberville is holding open in vain hope these positions so that if and when Trump is reelected, elected again, he gets to put his people in place to do that day one thing that you were talking about.
Yes, I guess so. I mean, that would make it easier. I mean, I guess if you're not planning on following any rules or any laws and those jobs are filled, you can just come in and say,
well, part of the deal is that if people protest, the military was going to pound on them.
Yes, right. I mean, this is entirely possible. But the more I think about the chaos that he can create, like if he's not going to follow the rules, right? Like, well, I wanted different generals, but I got these guys instead because Biden was president. But now I'm president, so I'm going to just fire generals and get new ones. I mean, I guess you could say that. I don't know if the military will agree with you, but anyway, it's a theory. And on the other hand, I mean, Tuberville continuing to hold those positions makes more sense with respect to what he said he was doing in the first place, that he wanted a policy change at the Pentagon level. I mean,
well, but in terms of rules, capital R.
Yes.
He failed.
Yes.
First of all, he was making Schumer threaten to change the rules altogether in terms of how the Senate does this.
Yeah.
By giving in to all but the top brass, he winds up, failing on his intent. And as far as the individual top brass people that he's trying to hold up, they can appoint them individually. It was impossible to do for 450 some odd people.
Yes.
But you can do it for 11.
Yeah.
You can have individual
Still
votes
annoying,
and the 11 bypass them and say, you failed again.
Yes. And good. I mean, so he promised his Republican colleagues that he'd get them out of this mess. And I mean, surrender is a way. Yeah. You know. So, okay, maybe he'll get them out. Maybe there'll be a rules change anyway. I don't think he cares one way or another whether the rules get changed. But so then go ahead and do it because, I mean, you don't want to enable anybody else to do this crap.
From an institutional point of view, there's just so much about this that's incomprehensible. Yes. That a freshman would do this. That a freshman would know to do this. That a freshman would have the temerity to stand up to all of his colleagues and do this. It just... it
used to be one of those things
incomprehensible.
Didn't happen, right? You spent. I mean, it's hard to think of a senator as having to take a back seat to anybody and sit and learn. But there's 90 other senators who know much more than you.
I don't think so.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it wasn't anything he figured out per se. That was something staff said. You can do this. Oh yeah, all right, cool. But, okay, so he's used to that structure, a head coach.
Right. Well, how do I pass a bill, said Jefferson Smith, and he was told, and, he did it. But still, the whole thing doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
that he would stick to it for this long and get nothing. I don't understand.
Nothing but bad press.
I'm just saying there's more to this story. We just don't know what it is yet.
Yes, it's worse for him, I'm sure, and I'd love to find out that more someday soon.
Also tangentially related to what you brought up in terms of what Trump is planning is Jack Smith revealing that there's yet another unindicted co-conspirator to his January 6th case who is a campaign staffer or staffer of some sort who doesn't appear to be one of the 6 numbered, not named.
Oh, no?
Who was planning on going to Detroit and causing a riot there to stop the voting count, which would specifically, intimidate black voters and disenfranchise them. And that was part and parcel of the plan. And Jack Smith intends to show that Trump had the intent of causing chaos, riots, and other things.
Well, that will be bad for him. I saw somebody floating the idea, although based on what I don't know, that it was Mike Romans or one of the guys who I thought was
Remember
one of the
we
6.
said he was a staffer who could have been the
Did we decide he wasn't number
person that
6?
People couldn't identify?
Or whatever number? Yeah.
Well, maybe he's number 7.
Maybe. I guess so, because I saw somebody hint that, and I said, I forget kind of who that guy is, but I remember the name, and he was one of the people that we thought was one of the 6, but now you remind me, they thought he was, and then they decided he wasn't, and maybe
they thought maybe Boris Epstein.
Yeah.
Epsteinstein is the number 6 person. Wasn't sure.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay.
I thought it was Mike Roman, but it turned out the consensus was Boris Epstein.
Okay, so this is how he comes back in. It might have been this guy.
But it actually might have been Mike Roman all along, just in a different context.
Yeah. Well, what do you know? A big surprise, as I was saying, when I found this news out yesterday. I can't believe that just because Roger Stone is working for them this time, that Roger Stone thought that they should use Roger Stone's plan for Florida 2000 in Detroit in 2020 just because he did it last time and it worked.
I was thinking that as I was reading this morning, this whole story, and said, this is a Brooks Brothers riot except with brown shirts, and this time they intended to do violence. Yeah,
and also some significant chance, by the way, they didn't do this thing, and I'm wondering whether there's a significant chance. Like, if I'm given the choice, where can I start a riot? Miami-Dade county offices or Detroit? I'd be, I'll take Miami-Dade.
I already won Florida. You don't need to.
If it's open. But, yeah, like Detroit is a place where you can start a riot and lose
Michigan, so let's do it in Michigan.
Yeah. I mean, that's why they wanted to do it there. But I'm wondering whether they gave any thought to the possibility of losing that riot in Detroit. Like people saying, oh, I'm sorry, did you say you were here to take our votes? Maybe we'll take your shirts.
I'm going to have to ask you to step outside.
Yeah. I don't know if you can win that riot, guys. So they didn't try, but I'm glad to see it being brought up there. That's good. The case is wide-ranging. Only a few people actually indicted, one, but that's fine. It's the one we wanted. But the evidence could inculpate. Is that really the right word for it? Because certainly could implicate. Sorry, I know that one is right. A number of others, and I'm just glad to see a robust case being brought in the Smith.
Right.
Courtroom. He's always been on top.
My pundit roundup title today was Reasons for Hope in These Bleak Times, referring to a number of things. But one of the things is, you want bleak? Look what Trump is trying to do in Detroit. You want hope? He's going to be accountable for it.
I like that. Cool.
Yeah, it is cool. Now, something else I have to bring up, since we're talking about Congress and Tommy Tuberville.
Okay.
This is the other chamber. But there's this guy who you sort of remember and keep bringing up in terms of his past, whereas we were only willing to talk about his present. Yes. That is to say, his brief stint as replacement, temporary acting pro tempore speaker.
Yes.
Patrick McHenry.
Yes.
He's quitting because he's had enough.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, we had a great time making fun of him.
Can't believe it. People didn't like his bow ties, I guess. And, the guy, who formerly the biggest a-hole in the House of Representatives, has been out a-holed hopelessly and is now viewed as a moderate by comparison, and realizes there's no way he's going to be able to catch up and pass the new crop of a-holes, much less the ones that are coming next.
Right.
And has decided to leave.
He can't even be more of a radical than Nancy Mace. How is he supposed to catch Matt Gaetz?
Right. Forget about it. So, all right.
At least Stefanik has passed him. I mean, everybody's passed him.
Yeah.
He's just given up. So, Daily Kos Elections Morning Digest labels it this way.
Oh.
Once a hellraiser, top House Republican calls it quits at age 48.
Well, all right. That's about right.
And we remember, you remember certainly, when he was a hellraiser. He wasn't a young gun. He was just a hellraiser.
Right. He was too young to be a young gun at the time. The young guns were themselves in their 40s.
He was young gun, yes, next generation.
Yeah, right.
Young gun junior.
And he was the
whatever
guy
you want to call it.
That they could barely tolerate at the time because he was kind of an annoyance. And then most of the older young guns got thrown out eventually, and then the last young gun that was left,
most of the older young guns shot
McCarthy.
themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
Actually, is the headline.
Right. Okay. That takes care of it. Right. Eric Cantor handed his hat, and then Paul Ryan after that, and the only one left was McCarthy, and the only person left around McCarthy that hadn't been elected in the last 15 minutes was Patrick McHenry, and now he's gone or going, and so's probably McCarthy. So
yeah. So there was this Broadway show, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying.
Oh, my favorite.
Which is actually a superb musical.
Like. Yeah.
But it's a send off, and it's a spoof of corporate life. And one of the songs in it, which was, I think, performed by Charles Nelson Riley of all people,
okay,
was I Play It the Company Way.
Huh. All right.
Whatever the company tells me, there I stay.
Okay.
The guy with the least principles and the guy who was willing to do whatever he needed to do in order to get wherever he needed to get that day was Kevin McCarthy, and he's the one who lasted the longest out of those so-called young guns.
Yeah, got to be an old gun.
Yeah, Pat Ryan, presumably, Paul Ryan, presumably had principles, presumably.
Wow. He left anyway.
Mike Johnson presumably has principles.
Oh.
Kevin McCarthy had none. I mean, everybody acknowledges. They don't even make an argument that he did.
Kevin McCarthy didn't even make an argument that he did.
Yeah.
That was his
and he's the one who lasted the longest.
Yeah. Right.
So that
and
tells
the
you
one
a whole lot about Congress and about what's
True.
going on.
Previously, by the way, the longest serving speaker in Republican history, child molester. So,
For which there's a rule.
yeah.
Not a real rule,
You
not a
have to be
capital
one.
rule, but a practical rule.
Yes.
Anyway, other reasons for hope. The gold standard of a young people polling, Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics, the IOP Youth Poll, is out yesterday with some really, really interesting findings. Here are the key takeaways. Fewer young Americans plan on voting in 2024 compared to the last election, last cycle this time. However, most of the decline comes from young Republicans and independent voters.
There's a bad news, good news setup.
Yeah, the Democrats, fall 2019, 68% would definitely vote. Fall 2023, 66%, really no difference. Republicans, 66%, fall of 2019, now it's 56.
Okay.
Independent unaffiliated, fall 2019, 41, now it's 31.
Okay.
Now,
I think I followed those numbers.
some of these independent unaffiliated are Trump voters.
Okay.
Some of them are democracy defenders, but who knows how many.
I don't know. There's no way for me to find out until it's too late.
While college graduates still plan to vote in robust numbers, college students and young people who are not in college and don't have a degree are less committed. And the decline in voting intention is most pronounced among younger Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and the decline among young whites is also notable, which is worth noting. Women indicate they're less likely to vote than men.
I don't
That never happens.
believe that. But okay.
That's what they say. I mean, it never happens. You're right. I mean, women always vote more than men.
Why are they lying? Well,
it's unclear what's going on there. And within those who are going to vote, President Biden has a solid lead against former President Trump in a hypothetical 2024 matchup. In a hypothetical head-to-head, Biden leads Trump by 11 points.
Okay. Oh.
Most young adults, you remember, he's got trouble with the youth vote, except for, in parts of it, the very youngest. I mean, among the most likely voters in the 2024 cycle, who are youth vote, President Biden leads by 24 points.
That is positive news.
Which is pretty much what he did in 2020. In 2020, exit polls with all their problems said Biden won the youth vote 60-36. Among the most likely voters, he's winning 57-33.
Okay. I mean...
Same.
Yeah. Good. I mean, hooray. It's a year.
Okay. So the biggest threat, if you believe it, to Biden with young voters is independent candidates. RFK Jr., Joe Manchin, Cornel West. The thing is, so his lead goes to 16 points and 24 among likely voters.
Okay.
The problem is some of these guys aren't even going to make the ballots, and independent candidates fade over time. So this is a snapshot like all polls, and you should ignore it for the same reason you should ignore all polls this far out.
Please ignore the last 5 minutes.
But the point is that the narrative that media wants to give you is not necessarily supported by current data. This is one of those situations where media has latched onto a narrative which may be a month old. People think the economy's bad. Actually, not so much anymore.
Okay, right.
People think the economy is really terrible, except the economy actually is getting better. Well, people are really unhappy with Biden, and Trump is leading in all the polls. Actually, not the 4 national polls. For latest, Biden is leading. Well, Biden is losing the young vote. Well, actually, according to the gold standard poll, he's not.
Oh, okay.
I mean, clearly there are soft spots and weaknesses that these things, these polls, these narratives highlight. That's absolutely true. There is work to be done. That's absolutely true. That doesn't mean the work won't get done.
Okay.
So, part of the issue, again, reporters and pundits just love narratives, and they hate to change the narrative when they've got it. I just wrote a beautiful article last week about it. Now you're asking me to change because things have changed.
It was so beautiful. Yeah, right. You don't want to let go of the good writing.
Yeah.
Even if
so, what does it all mean? Is Biden old? Yeah, Biden is not young. No question about it. He doesn't get out enough. He doesn't give vigorous 3-hour rallies.
Well, vigorous. Who knows?
That make you think, oh, even though he's 80, 81, this guy still has the fact that he travels overseas and he does everything behind the scenes is all good and true and wonderful and the proper way to do things.
Yeah.
But that doesn't set narrative.
Right.
And so, this whole thing about, well, what's more important, is part and parcel of the whole discussion. For that reason, speaking about the economy, but about politics too, I just found this interesting piece, or I found this piece interesting, however you want to put it.
I found it earlier, but it's been interesting for a long time.
By Noah Smith, who writes for Substack under the header No Opinion.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Right? NOAH opinion, no opinion. And this is entitled Vibes versus Data.
Okay.
Or as the legal people would say, Vibes v. Data.
Right. In the case of Vibes v. Data 2023.
It's asymmetric warfare out there. As we gear up for election season, the big debate is whether the U.S. economy is doing well or not.
Yes.
Basically, the Biden supporters are right. The U.S. economy is truly excellent.
Oh.
Inflation looks beat, everybody has a job, incomes and wealth are rising, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, I can't command people to simply stop being mad about the inflation to reduce their purchasing power 2 years ago.
No.
People care about what they care about. More about this after the break.
Okay. Well, very good. We started our music a little bit late, but we'll jump out, I think, at the right time, which is just about now. And we'll be back in 2 minutes hence.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm going to have to do some real editing after the show. Okay, well, we're back. We got another segment to go through here. I will note for the record, because it's always nice to note for the record when people chime in for the record, Mighty OCD, pointing out that, yes, and I think this was probably where most people's minds went at first when we were talking about the losses in having your military promotion delayed for so long. There is, of course, the difference in pay that comes with a promotion, which people were no doubt counting on and might have been of great use to them over the months that they missed out. No word yet whether they're going to get that pay retroactively or anyway. I mean, I tend to doubt it because it would be a huge expense for people who didn't hold that rank at that time. But yeah, among the many other things, the more complicated, less obvious things that Greg pointed out that are probably have as great, if not more, impact on people, but that Yeah, everybody's mind goes to the pay raise, but there's a lot more than just that. But that's not insignificant by any stretch of the imagination. Just wanted to let you know that if you chime in on these stories and I get to see it before the show is over, I do like to make note of it.
Yeah, it's like the whole discussion that military people have to pack up and move a lot.
Yeah.
That's true. That affects them.
That is
their
correct.
families have to pack up and move a lot. The kids in school have to pack up and move a lot. And that's just not so obvious when you just say, well, that guy had to move.
Right. That's true. And everybody moves at some point. But, of course, everybody knows the story of military families moving every couple of years.
The other argument here is that if these 400 some odd people, didn't have the money that they could have had this last year, they couldn't use it to buy stuff and help the economy. And if you look at that writ large, I suppose if I were a politician who wasn't interested in facts, I could argue that Tommy Tuberville is actually holding up the entire economy.
Yes. We should try that.
Because Tommy Tuberville has put on hold everybody's aspirations for what they would like to do, at least for a year.
Yes. And, of course, he'll have very little connection to that because before coming to the Senate, he was one of those multi-million-dollar football coaches, so he has no money worries and doesn't understand that.
So Noah Smith was talking about the difference between the perceived economy and the actual economy, and he's got an interesting graph here. John Byrne Murdoch of the Financial Times, who is a data analyst who I like to follow, Financial Times, recently found that consumer sentiment closely tracks real economic indicators in other countries, but not America.
Okay. All right.
Since Joe Biden was elected, Republicans essentially have decided to not believe the economy's doing okay.
I mean, I guess
it's
that's
absolutely partisan. I mean, there's no question about it. It's just really fascinating.
I wonder
if they've simply decided not to accept that they lost. They just, and this goes back to this whole bigger picture of like, what are these people thinking? Well, they were humiliated by the fact that, 2021 January 6th riot happened.
Yes. Well,
they lost.
Sorta.
They then got, not only did they fail the way Tommy Tuberville failed, but even worse, they got, convicted of failing.
Yes.
And they've just decided, well, I'm not going to accept anything anymore.
Okay.
I don't accept the election. I don't accept the economy's better. If a Democrat does it, I don't accept it. I don't accept anything. I don't accept what the media says. I don't accept what you say. It's just a weird pathology. And it's highly partisan in terms of how that happens. It's the Republicans. It's the conservatives. It's the Trump people.
It's a strategy in this. If you're in the housing market, buy your house from a Republican. You can lowball them on the offer and say the economy is terrible, and either their brain explodes or you get a deal.
Right.
That's a good position to be in. It doesn't.
So Noah Smith says, look, the difference between the way Europeans think about it and Americans think about it could be because Americans simply care about different things than Europeans. Mm-hmm. We simply might have started to really hate interest rates, and Europeans didn't. But a simpler explanation is Americans' negative sentiment is due to something other than economic indicators. And it's possible that something is a negative narrative, which is what we will shortcut as vibes.
Okay. I'll take. I mean, it's a good explanation. It's a weird thing. It's not great that Americans are upside down on understanding their economy, but.
Well, and then he gives examples of Twitter influencers and TikTok influencers simply repeating wrong things to highlight the point that, well, Biden's terrible because look at all these things.
Yeah, what a terrible economy. I stay at home and scream videos for a living.
Yeah, unemployment is low. You think that's good? It's bad. Retirees have been forced back into the workforce.
As YouTubers.
That's not true. None of it's true.
No.
They just keep screaming it.
Right. They're all in the villages getting STDs.
Right. In fact, the prime age employment rate, which only goes up to age 54, is near record highs, and that isn't affected by retirees.
No. All right.
Right. But observe how a negative narrative can allow people to see any piece of data as being a sign of a bad economy. Now, if you want to look at that in terms of politics, just take the New York Times. I mean, New York Times pitchpot Doug J. Balloon makes a living pointing out that no matter what it is, it's bad for Joe Biden.
Yes. I don't know if he makes a living at that.
Well, you know.
He shouldn't. I mean, come on. But on the other hand, why not? Because
he makes
so many
a
Republicans
social media
make a
living.
That's fine.
It's a virtual living.
If he were a
I don't know if he
Republican,
gets real
he'd be
money
rich.
for it, but you know, it's that's what he does. That's his thing. That's his gig.
Good. Right. I also don't get. We both are in that world. Hey, we do this thing for no reason.
I make a living commenting on Kagro in the morning.
Right.
Not a living like in the sense that I get paid for it.
Yeah. Like I'm going to die.
But it's what I do.
Living. Right. Yes, that's true. The Republicans, though, somehow actually, in many cases, do actually make a living. It is interesting as you were. I was nodding along with your point and saying yes. I'm also want to bring back one of your other older points where I mean, the conclusion here is, well, Americans are accepting of this negative narrative. And remember, what's interesting: 30% of Americans are interested in buying into this narrative for partisan reasons, and then, like something we mentioned yesterday, all the photographers of the media are gathered around this one burning trash can and saying there's a national narrative going on. How is that happening?
Well, and again, he likens it to what happens with Congress. Like Congress sucks, but my congressman's okay.
Oh.
My own personal finances are good, in fact, better than ever.
Yeah.
But, the rest of the country is going to hell. I've never been there, but that's what I hear.
I guess so. I mean, that's the only way I can understand being able to afford sitting around your house or your car, I guess, making videos all day about how bad the economy is from your car, which, by the way, is no small expense. Not to mention the video camera, and how are you finding the time all day to be yelling at things?
Simon Rosenberg, the Hopium guy, finds some other interesting things with polling. This is not Harvard IOP. This is Economist YouGov.
Okay.
And in terms of approval on the Israel-Hamas war, Democrats approve 58-23. That's plus 35.
Approve of what?
Biden's handling of the situation.
I see. So approving of his handling
they don't
of the situation.
approve of killing people. That's not the point. The point is, like, how do you think he's handling this?
50 what?
58-23, Democrats.
That's quite a lot.
Plurality of 18 to 29-year-olds also approved, more than any age group. So, again, Biden is ignoring everybody and doing what he thinks is right.
Oh, no.
Wait. Are you trying to say this is a good thing or a bad thing? I don't understand.
Yeah, not sure. I mean, there was this unexpectedly successful, if temporary, always understood to be temporary, pause in the hostilities and exchange of hostages. There's movement on
with Biden making the point, not just suggesting it, but flat out saying,
"That's what I mean.
We were doing okay, and this could have continued. Hamas broke the ceasefire. They broke the pause. They broke the hostage deal because they didn't want to give back the women they have, and we think it's because they've been badly mistreated and they don't want us to know." He said that, and his spokespeople have said that.
Oh.
We know that Israel is claiming that the reason things broke down is Hamas refused to give up the women that they supposedly still had. We don't know if they still have them. We don't know if they're still alive. We don't know
if they ever had them.
We don't know if they ever had them.
Yeah, that's
but they refuse
the danger
to give them up.
of this hostage exchange as the pivot point in all of this. But okay, but
and then they fired missiles.
So
that combo,
it was going to start.
Was not going to go over well.
All right, but there's other things happening to other moving parts. Sanctions against West Bank settlers who are particularly
for the first
egregious.
Time that Biden is doing, and that's important because the West Bank is the under-discussed, part and parcel
somehow.
of this. Netanyahu had Israel Defense Forces, IDF, the army, in the West Bank to protect settlers, which is one of the reasons why southwest Israel was so open to Hamas attack.
Yes, and there's news
he
on
did
that
that.
front
That was
today.
a deliberate thing.
That's
now not necessarily to clear
are.
the area, but to have them in the West Bank to protect settlers. Why? Because settlers are part of his government.
That's right. I mean, this was essentially the biggest, largest, and deadliest extension of the time for some traffic problems in Southwest Israel strategy. Like it is becoming clear that they were deliberately ignoring strategic holes in a territory, a part of the country where Netanyahu's support had more than cratered. He was in single digits for the Likud party in terms of the polling there. And his biggest supporters are scattered West Bank settler families out in the middle of nowhere, but on the other side of the country. And the entire army was over there. There's also news. I mean, we found out about their Israel having gathered intelligence a year in advance of a possibility of an attack like this. But now it's been followed up with a story in Haaretz, I happened to see today, that there was specific warning again, days, maybe one day before the attack. Hey, you ought to do something about maybe evacuating this music festival that's taking place. And they said, let's not, and see what happens. And then they were all killed. And that's not going to go over all that well in Israel,
you think?
Yeah. I think people will, be annoyed about that.
Right. So things move slowly and then they move quickly. And I don't think anybody's predicting Netanyahu's going to lose his prime ministership during the war.
They can't dislodge this guy.
But the fact that he's never going to leave, I would take that with a huge grain of salt, given what you just said and all the other stuff that I hear about how people really feel about him. Netanyahu met with the hostage families. It didn't go well. I mean, that kind of thing. And they have a lot of attention, shall we say, from the Israeli public right now. So a lot more to come from there.
All right.
Here in the U.S., as you point out, Taylor Swift is the person of the year, which actually I predicted on Twitter.
Oh, did you?
One of my
exciting. Congratulations.
Commonly used Twitter discussions was with a guy I speak with frequently who said, I just don't get who Time is going to pick as person of the year. There's like no obvious choice. And I said, there is, Taylor Swift. And he said, oh my God, that is obvious. Where can we bet on this? And
Ireland.
This morning wrote me and said, I'm very disappointed. I never found a place to put down a bet.
Wow. That's because he was worried about the economy being bad.
Yeah. Well, so the Bulwark had a piece by Jill Lawrence. Taylor Swift is the antidote we need in the age of Donald Trump. This was back in October. A generational talent, but also she's kind and she's tough. She's who we need. So, I'm all in on Time because that's the reason why she should be person of the year. And the fact she's going to make $4 billion from this Eras tour, she's good at math.
Yes.
She can count to $4 billion.
I think this is a good choice. Apparently, wherever they have these concerts, there are small seismic events being measured as the crowd bounces up and down.
She makes up for Tommy Tuberville's hold on the economy.
Yeah, she's distributing the income. Well, she might be taking all the income. But nonetheless, people are going and having a good time. And but that's welcome in bleak times. Joe Biden made this possible, ladies and gentlemen.
Right. It's a dark Brandon thing.
Trump would have sent Moms for Liberty to shut down the tour.
Speaking of Moms for Liberty, since you brought it up.
Me? What are you talking about? Yeah. Moms for Liberty.
Mother Jones and many other people, including the local Miami papers.
The swinger papers? Or just the
regular Florida GOP chair, this is in Mother Jones, was accused of rape. Is his career over? Christian Ziegler repeatedly has denied the accusations and has said he has no plans to resign. His wife, of course, is the Moms for Liberty co-founder.
Church lady.
And, his name is Christian Ziegler. He's not a real Christian, is he?
Dirk Diggler Ziegler.
Yeah. I mean, this is just so bizarre. He was accused of sexual assault last week. The backlash against him was swift. Florida governor, presidential hopeful Ron DeSantis, a former Ziegler supporter, said at a press conference last Thursday, I don't see how we can continue with that investigation ongoing. I don't see how we could do that with the gravity of these situations.
That's
what he said. Imagine Republicans applying that to Donald Trump and George Santos in Congress. Well, he hasn't been convicted of anything. Why should we do Well, when it's one of yours and it's one of your situations and you think it's hurting you, all of a sudden, oh, well, we don't have to wait for the court to convict. We'll just go ahead and say the gravity of the situation requires us to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. They have to do that for everybody else that they have an opportunity to do that to, so that they can look past continuing to excuse Donald Trump.
On Tuesday, Senator Rick Scott weighed in, writing in a statement, "I don't see how Christian can continue to successfully act as chair while this cloud hovers over him." Moms for Liberty, the Florida-based crusading parents' rights group that Ziegler's wife Bridget helped found, stopped short of criticizing him.
Hey, what do you know?
But their tweet expressing support for Bridget didn't mention him.
They shouldn't really.
I don't know that means
expressing
anything.
much support
It's
for
not
her
really their
either.
business.
I guess. Well.
I mean, for all I know, they're a 501c3, 4, 5, or 7 or whatever.
Yeah. The only issue, of course, with there are a lot of issues, obviously, with Moms for Liberty. Interesting that they are focusing on Christian, who clearly, there should be a focus on him. He's violent. He's accused of a violent crime.
He's the guy who tried to rape the third party in their menage a trois.
And
so
in
that's why they're
fact,
focusing on him.
Yes. Well, according to the allegations, he actually did do that, but it was more than an attempt. But the reason, of course, it's problematic, and I guess why Moms for Liberty is avoiding discussion of the rest of it, is Moms for Liberty, of course, an organization dedicated to propositions like, well, there are only two genders, etc., and LGBTQ individuals in the country ought to shut up and go away.
Yeah, because they're woke.
Right.
Like our co-founder.
Yes. I mean, essentially, that's the issue. As the mathematics of it is, if there are two genders and three people involved, one of you has a problem with Moms for Liberty. Wow. And if it's the co-founder of Moms for Liberty, then that seems like something they need to work through and maybe should seek counseling.
Well, if you're talking about school, I just think it's important to point out that Taylor Swift's way of doing things teaches you to count to 4 billion. And Moms for Liberty way of doing things teaches you to count to 3.
Right. Yeah. So,
and 4 billion is greater than 3.
That is true.
Even
4,
in Florida.
Even divided by 1 billion, it's still greater than 3. Yep. They got problems on their hands, and I'm glad they're taking care of the top issue first. You can debate all you want what to do with somebody who's a hypocrite, but there shouldn't be much debate about what to do with somebody who's a rapist.
Well, he says, alleged rapist, as you point out, Ziegler repeatedly has denied the accusation and said he has no plans to resign, and he has an excellent reason for not resigning. We have a country to save, he says.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
That just takes care of that.
Yeah,
right?
We do have that. I mean, one of the things we want to do is get rid of the rapists.
False allegations of a crime, put that mission on the bench as I wait for the process to wrap up.
The indispensable alleged rapist man, apparently.
Yeah. So let's see. We have a special meeting to discuss Ziegler's future by the Florida GOP. That's coming up.
Very sexy sounding meeting.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah. A lot of room key swapping, I would guess.
At the meeting?
Yep. It's probably taking place at a hotel with hourly rates.
Well, we figured it out, and you can only have an odd number of people at the meeting.
That's right.
It's got to be divisible by 3.
Yes, and by the way, as you know, in politics, in power politics, threesomes and three-ways are referred to, by the way, as a triumvirate. That's the proper way to talk about it.
It's not a gang of 3?
Gang has a very specific meaning in this context, and maybe, you need more.
Okay. Well, I don't want to know more. I already know too much.
I have said too much.
TMI.
Okay. These people are crazy. All right. That's some kind of vibe for you.
Right. And the final group of things, without having any specific article to refer to, but I'll just tell you that the Atlantic entire issue, 22 some odd stories in it.
Yes.
About why you should pay attention to what's going on with Donald Trump, I think is just resonating a lot with the talking heads. And there's just story after story, including the New York Times, about, Trump really means what he says. Oh, this is really bad.
This is good news.
Bulwark, you're not really sufficiently alarmed. You are alarmed, but not sufficiently alarmed.
Right.
You know,
It's a
in other
trend.
words, it seems to be having one of these breakthrough moments in the media where they've decided to get serious and start covering this stuff.
Yes, and I have noticed, I called out yesterday that Charlie Savage, in distributing links to his article, or to articles to which he contributed.
Yeah, with
others.
Maggie Haberman and some others.
Yes, and saying, using Jay Rosen's terminology very, I think, pointedly, and saying this is the latest in our series of reporting on the stakes of the election. That's, I think, a clear nod to Jay Rosen, which is not something New York Times reporters frequently do.
Right.
So very good news, I thought, in all of that. Poor
if I
timing.
recall, that was Maggie Haberman, Jonathan Swan, and Charlie Savage.
That's right. I was going to say there's some poor timing, but something we ought to bring up because we got a plan for how we'll deal with it and be conscious of it. Tomorrow, December 7th,
yes,
a date that will live in infamy,
yes.
Is a Washington Post Writers Guild strike against the paper. Yes. And I see on social media that they're publicizing this, and that we're instructed to not engage with Washington Post content for the day. I guess the writers will be providing none, and they'll just be running stuff that's already in the can, so to speak.
Yeah.
But we're not supposed to, engage with Washington Post content tomorrow, which is like a lot of our usual content.
So for 24 hours, don't read the Washington Post?
I think that's the deal. I'll have to dig up the social media alerts on it to be sure I'm passing on the message correctly. But we ought to start thinking about that.
Well, I won't read the Washington Post.
Yeah.
I'll read the New York
and
Times,
here
and I'll
they're
read other people
probably
reading
doing
the Washington
such.
Post and commenting on it.
Yeah. But they'll be
But
back
there's a lot
and
of other
commenting
outlets.
on the stakes of the race beginning, I guess, on December 8th. But they're supposed to be making a point of some kind to the management, and if we can
good for them.
assist them in doing so, just a day.
And a reminder
Yeah.
that George Santos, who may make $4 billion on his Eros tour, is actually probably going to make more money than he was as a congressman, by hooking up with various and sundry social media outlets.
Yes, he's on
But
Cameo.
George Santos got exposed by local media. It was a local Long Island paper that broke all the stuff about him lying about his resume.
Yes.
Which is
We missed
highlighting
it,
the
but they
importance
did do
of reporting media
That's right.
and newspapers and why you should support them and why you should support people like the Washington Post Guild.
Yeah. When the story broke wide, everybody had to go and do some research, and then they were all astonished to find out that the locals had already done it and run it, but we didn't read it because it was, who knew at the time that this race was even going on. But it was, and the locals were horrified by it and reported on it accurately, and we found out later. So, all right, well, good. So calling attention to the needs of the people who actually generate this content. Most of what we do on the show is dependent entirely on their work. So we'll do our best to not stray over the line tomorrow. I guess it could happen, but we'll probably be looking to find alternative sources. And I guess we could say our fine friends who write for the Washington Post almost certainly had this story and would have enlightened us about it today, but for the fact that they're calling attention to a work action there today. Tomorrow.
Anyway, that's all I got for today.
All right.
We'll see what non-Washington Post stuff we have for tomorrow.
Right. And I'll dig that up I better make sure that I know what I'm talking about. I don't want anybody to not engage with Washington Post content on my account if it's not happening, but I'm pretty sure I saw that correctly. So we'll alert you tomorrow and about what we're doing and why, with some authoritative communications on it, as opposed to my speculation.
So, let's see. Washington Post Guild formally announces strike advisory. Washington Post workers will strike for 24 hours on December 7th. Unfair labor practice strike protests the Post disregard of law and bargaining, failure to reach strong contract for everyone.
Okay.
Post workers are walking out for 24 hours because we know there's no Washington Post without us. More than 700 Post employees have pledged to walk off the job at midnight on December 7th.
Right. So tonight at midnight, stop doing the things that would run afoul of theirs. I don't know what it is, but I guess, I don't know. No clicks if you can help it. Take a good look at what you're clicking on. You should always be doing that for operational security anyway. And the news, as it turns out, is widely covered, and very often we'll be able to find alternative coverage until.
And this
all
is
those
what they
guys go on
say. This
strike.
is directly from the Washington Post Guild. This is a quote.
Thank you.
On December 7th, we ask you to respect our walkout by not crossing the picket line for 24 hours. Please do not engage with any post content that includes our print and online news stories, podcasts, videos, games, and recipes.
Recipes. Can I cook one or just not download it?
You can't eat
it. So I'm going to have to fast. All right. Well, I don't know if I'm using any Washington Post recipes, but okay. It is company wide. Games, videos, recipes. Want ads? Is that out? I don't know. Don't go to work tomorrow if you got your job through the Washington Post want ads. Is that okay? I don't know. That's a collateral strike, and it's against the law.
Right.
All right. Well, okay. So now we know exactly what their communique is, which saves us from having to do it tomorrow. But now we're prepared, so that's good. Yeah. Thanks for digging that up.
You're welcome, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right, very good. I only have
allegedly, anyway.
Yeah, that's right. And by talk to, we mean wink, wink. Actually, talk to. We're very literal here. Okay,
yeah,
so
I'll see you tomorrow.
No
wink,
problem.
Wink.
Yeah,
and when I say I'll see you, I really can't see you.
Right, and you have to say wink because I can't see you.
You can't see it.
Right, so it's all
because my monitor doesn't have a camera, so there's no point even trying to argue that I should.
Oh, okay. Well, we've been consistent all along. All right, very good. I'll take care of the musical outros, etc., and introducing what we'll be doing in the second hour. But I appreciate it, and we'll see you tomorrow. Just you, not the Washington Post. Right?
Well, even though you're doing the music, don't do Taylor Swift because that's probably copyrighted. She owns everything.
I'll do the previous incarnations that somebody else owns. Although they'll probably charge me too. Yeah, all right. Well, we'll make sure not to violate that copyright. The only one we violate is I don't know, from the royalty-free music that we use, and occasionally when we play it late and roll it out long, YouTube picks it up.
Right.
But I'm right
in
on time.
honor of her being chosen by Time as Person of the Year, tomorrow's Taylor's Kagro X will be at 9 a.m.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Because she owns everything now. And there might even be a college football bowl named after her by the time this is all over. So we'll see. Her connection with
but her
football
boyfriend
is
gets to play.
That's true.
Those are the
Maybe
rules.
forever. Okay, Taylor Swift bowl. Thanks, Greg. See you tomorrow. See. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Another hour to go. How are we going to do it? Tomorrow, it's a strike. Don't engage with our content in the second hour. All right. Well, we really got. I'm glad that we dug that up ahead of time, and I don't have to do that overnight because I would probably forget. But all right. Well, we got the word straight from the unionized horse's mouth on that in that respect. So we'll deal with that as best we can. Hopefully we don't make any mistakes. Sometimes on the fly, some of these links are disguised in ways that don't make it obvious that they're coming from the Washington Post. And we'll also have to the Washington Post writers are kind of everywhere and doing great work. So it's also possible, for instance, we may be looking for an alternative source on something and click through to it. And although we won't be engaging with the clicks will go, say, to the Kansas City Star if we were to go there for the reporting. But sometimes they will use Washington Post wire service items. And, we won't be crossing the picket line with a click. But then if we read and engage with the content, but it's Washington Post content, they'll indicate that, and we'll have to have an eye out for that tomorrow. Okay, let's see. To recap some of the other items and to move on to some others, I wanted to, on the Tommy Tuberville front anyway, give a look at Joan McCarter's story about it. Written, of course, yesterday after appearing on our show. We knew that this was coming, and we were ready for it, and then when it happened, Joan was on it. Tommy Tuberville raises the white flag of surrender. because military, right? Okay. And I guess you could say throws in the towel, but of course when football coaches throw towels in, it's because they're challenging something as opposed to giving up on something. So the metaphor isn't as good. The Senate can finally confirm the promotions of hundreds of senior military officers, and I guess they went ahead and did so, but this was written and posted at about 3 p.m. yesterday. They had been held up for 10 months, in case you were wondering how much total compensation did people actually lose. I mean, it's almost a full year of this higher salaries that they were deprived of. 10 months held up by Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville. He announced Tuesday that he was finally dropping his hold on most promotions after weeks of pressure from fellow Republicans. "I'm releasing everybody," Tuberville told reporters, then immediately contradicted himself. I still got a hold on, I think, 11 four-star generals. It's 44 stars, potentially, between the lot of them. 3 apiece at the moment, I guess. So 33 stars that they should be using to club him over the head. Everybody else is completely released from me. We would all love to be released from you completely, boy. But other than that, it's over. There's a sign of how serious a lawmaker he is, or there's a sign. He doesn't even know how many people are affected by his actions. Good point. In fact, as of December 1st, there were 445 senior military officers whose careers and lives at large, I would add, as Greg did, had been taken hostage by the senator, and there are indeed 11 four-star posts he is still blocking. Tuberville initially blocked the promotions to protest a Pentagon policy that allows paid leave to service members to travel. Why would they travel? If they have to travel out of state for abortions. Plenty of people, including former GOP Representative Liz Cheney, have speculated that in recent months he's doubled down on his obstruction on behalf of Donald Trump. Why is Tommy Tuberville doing that? Cheney said in an interview on NPR. So even she's engaging in this theory. It's causing great damage to this nation's military readiness. Is he holding those positions open so that Donald Trump can fill them? What's he doing? It's certainly not serving the purpose of the United States of America. That could be the case on the remaining holds, the top brass of the military, but it's also the solution that Democrats and a growing number of Republicans were ready to deploy. They have their own rules-based workaround in this. If Tuberville hadn't caved in the next few weeks, the majority leader, Chuck Schumer, was going to put a resolution on the floor to allow the Senate to bypass Tuberville on all but those top positions. So doesn't look like they were going to be able to bail those guys out with the rules change. But as Greg mentioned, if it's down to 11, it's a big waste of time and an annoyance, but you can handle 11 appointments, just not 400 plus. Right after Tuberville's announcement, Schumer said the Senate would move as quickly as possible to get the confirmations done. Finally lifting his unnecessary and harmful holds on our nation's military officials, I'm happy we can finally move forward and give these men and women the promotion they deserve. I plan to move these promotions as soon as possible, possibly later this afternoon, and I guess that's exactly what did happen. So, good news there. But just wanted to give Joan her due in covering that. We've been talking about that for a while, and now that is that's done. Let's see. Other things I wanted to catch up on and offer you for consideration. I can't read this entire article because it's behind a paywall. In Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, I just want to tell you what I can tell you from their paywalled article, just to clarify, because I mentioned it earlier, and now I can pass on the paywalled article, and you can, I don't know, if you subscribe to Haaretz or want to subscribe to Haaretz, you can do it, but just by way of proof that I didn't make this thing up, here's their article, or from their, I think their latest edition. This massacre should have been prevented. Despite Israeli intelligence warnings about a Hamas attack, the army didn't evacuate the Nova Festival. This is, like I said, a progression from the discovery a few days ago that the Israeli intelligence organizations got word of the larger planning for the Hamas attack a year in advance. This, a much more specific warning, a much more specific date. Top defense officials, the subheader says, held urgent consultations the night before October 7th about a possible Hamas attack. But no one in the IDF notified the Nova Festival organizers or the partygoers, hundreds of whom were mown down, and for 9 hours, no one came to save them. I mean, that's a good reminder there, because I had not actually had that in mind. There was the fact that they didn't warn them, but then there's also the fact that the army was so slow in responding to this area where it's like they needed to have some traffic problems for whatever reason in getting to the battlefront. They were super slow in responding, just as, for instance, the National Guard was super slow in responding to January 6th for some strange reason. What a weird parallel there is there. Hours before Hamas's October 7th terror attack, Israel's security forces had enough warning signs to prepare, at least partially, for the possibility that terrorists would seek to infiltrate from Gaza into Israel. Yaniv Kubovich writes, but that's the extent of what we're going to be able to read from them, and I think that their paywall is fairly robust and that we cannot get around it with Pocket. But that's the latest, and I don't know, a lot of people are going to have to absorb that one. It's not that it will cause Netanyahu to lose much support in that area of Israel. He had almost zero in that area anyway, but elsewhere, perhaps in Israel, where they were still considering him legitimate, perhaps even if they weren't voting for him, maybe they changed their minds a little bit about. I mean, this is really moving from the general to the specific, and we'll see if that makes a dent in his support, and whether there's even going to be an opportunity to register, whether that dent happens, given that they're unlikely to try and change the makeup of the government in the middle of this war. And as others have pointed out, now, of course, this means that Netanyahu has every interest in making sure the war drags out and continues, because during the prosecution of that war, it's unlikely that there'll be enough momentum to replace him, force him out, hold an election, anything of the sort. So, well, that would be bad news, to say the least. Okay, let's see. Other updates on the former guy, the fascist guy, as TFG also stands for, that might be necessary to bring us up to date on. And I'm wondering, is there any Washington Post stuff that we should shoehorn in before tomorrow? Oh, you know what? As a matter of fact, yes. So I'll do this in the reverse order that I thought we should have been presenting it yesterday, but only because then I didn't get to part 2 yesterday because I needed to talk to Joan, and that was well worth doing, and I'll always opt for that, even over completing our work and reading Greg Sargent's piece yesterday. And we cut it off in a place where it made it sound like Greg Sargent didn't have his head on his, screwed on right. And that's unfortunate, because he does, and he did, and he wanted to make an important point by the end of the piece. So now we'll start over again. His opinion piece from the other day. Enough with all the fatalism about a Trump dictatorship, despite the fact that he keeps promising to execute that dictatorship. And of course, everybody who opposes it as well. All right. So, we'll give you the wind up and the pitch, the whole thing all over again, just as Greg intended it to be, just because tomorrow we can't read it. Are you afraid of Donald Trump dictatorship? And once again, that does sound like a late night infomercial. Do you suffer from, are you afraid of a Trump dictatorship? Well, know this, the only thing you have to fear is fear of Tyrannus Trumpus itself. I think I would have edited that out, Greg. But anyway, by now it's hard to deny that Trump has a narrow but plausible path to authoritarian rule in the United States. Polls show, and that's one of the problems, by the way, of the authoritarian, a plausible path to it. Like, there shouldn't be any such thing as a plausible path to authoritarian rule in the United States. But, of course, one of the things that we forgot to do, the founders forgot to help us in this way. We forgot to put in the part where it's illegal to do stuff that's against the law. It's not self-executing, in other words. We show you what the law will allow. We just don't have a mechanism in place in all cases, in all necessary cases, or for what to do if people violate this thing. We're not sure who gets to say whether the thing has been violated, and if so, whether there's a penalty involved and what that penalty ought to be. Sometimes the penalty is spelled out. You can't be an officer of the United States. Well, what does officer mean? And what do you mean? Who decides whether he's an officer? Who decides whether he did this thing? That's not all that clear. Yeah, well, we're having a problem with that. Anyway, by now it's hard to deny that Trump has a plausible, narrow but plausible path to authoritarian rule. Polls show he could well win next year's election. Trump allies are openly developing an elaborate blueprint to transform a second term into a full-blown autocracy. I think I screwed up the pronunciation of blown yesterday, too, which I guess leaves me out of the Florida Republican Party, probably. Anyway, prominent columnists have demonstrated in great detail how it might succeed. But certain versions of this argument have grown seriously problematic. It's sometimes said that our institutions and civic culture have withered so much that resistance to Trumpian tyranny would be incapacitated, rendering its onset all but inevitable. Such a reading of the moment risks leading us astray. It fails to account for much of the good. Bear with me, or bear with Greg here for a second. Much of the good that transpired during the Trump years. Hold on. From which there is plenty to learn. Undue fatalism could even prove counterproductive, de-energizing voter opposition exactly when Trump is brazenly projecting his dictatorial intentions. That's always true. No question, extreme pessimism is understandable. Trump faces multiple criminal indictments, including for allegedly attempting to destroy free and fair elections in the United States, and that's bad. He and his allies are vowing to stock the government with loyalists who would trample legal constraints, arrest political opponents without cause, and persecute the, quote, vermin voters who resist him. Yet, there's a yet. Yet, even as all this unfolds in plain sight, Trump's grip on GOP primary voters has tightened, and he continues to run strong against President Biden. Surely this means, as some have argued, that the great mass of voters are prepared to roll over and succumb to despotism, right? No, it doesn't. And our own Greg Dworkin reminds us all the time, and it's valuable that he does so frequently and repeatedly. This is 30% or so of the country who are interested in this. There's a larger percentage who might say, I understand that, but I can't vote for Democrats, and that will facilitate some real problems. But it's worth noting from time to time that this is a significant minority. It's bad that it's significant, but it's also in the minority by a significant margin and defeatable. So, to the extent that the voting outcome matters, you can defeat this. So no, it doesn't. The polls are certainly disconcerting, but let's not draw premature conclusions from them about the electorate's civic health or its attunement to the threat to democracy that Trump poses. This might be easy to overlook amid Trump's daily degradations, but the Trump years offer at least some cause for optimism. Please explain. Get to it. I'll get out of your way. When Trump executed his 2017 ban on many Muslims entering the country, crowds descended on airports in a surprising outpouring of support. That is true and an excellent point. Makes me feel better instantly. Good example. A year later, historians Lara Putnam and Theda Skopal, I gotta check out how she pronounces that name. Hopefully that's it. Anyway, they documented unexpected groundswell of painstaking political organizing among formerly apathetic middle-aged women to defend democracy, fueling Democrats' 2018 midterm blowout. During the 2020 election season, despite outbreaks of street violence, many voters saw protests against police brutality as peaceful, legitimate political activity, which it was, which is why they saw it that way. But, they were being exhorted by the other side not to see it that way, and they resisted doing that. And, usually with the bully pulpit that presidents have, they can force a different interpretation on things to be accepted widely, and that was not the case here. They rejected Trump's efforts to smear them in threatening terms. In the 2022 midterms, many prominent GOP election deniers lost, and fears for democracy were a key motivator for voters. It remains underappreciated, but our national response to the anti-democratic menace of the Trump years has in some respects been surprisingly good, not just electorally, but also institutionally. Trump's gaming of the judicial system to overturn his 2020 loss hit a wall in the courts. By a wide bipartisan margin, Congress passed reforms to Trump-proof the system by which we count electoral votes. I mean, to the extent that the rule of law means anything at that point, the next time we have such an effort. But that's all you can do. Those are the options available to us at the moment. But an even better point that despite Trump's gaming of the judicial system, which he did for 4 years, he still could only manage a 60-1 or 1-60, I guess, record in the courts. I mean, he had stocked the judiciary with his own judges. He occasionally drew his own appointees in these cases and still lost almost every single time. So that's important. Of course, to Trump, that just means, well, next time we take over, however we take over, we've got a lot more disrupting of the judiciary to do. But, it's good to know that 4 years of screwing with it didn't net him any results. Anyway, Trump's incitement of a violent coup attempt inspired the Democrat-led hearings investigating the January 6th attack, the most riveting public case mounted by a governing body in at least a generation. Election officials, Republican lawmakers, and even former advisors to Trump testified with extraordinary courage, surely turning many voters against election deniers in 2022, or at least motivating people who are otherwise less than motivated to come out and vote when they could have skipped it. Fears that the Justice Department would refrain from prosecuting Trump and his co-conspirators amid more intimations of mob violence proved unfounded. And that's true and well worth pointing out, especially for people who are doubters, and there are still doubters among them because of the pace at which things happen. But people who said, like, for instance, that the Attorney General would delay or maybe just never bring charges against Trump because we don't do such things in this country, and we don't prosecute our former presidents, and institutional objections to doing that. Merrick Garland is who I'm speaking of, and who I was blanking on for some reason. I'm stuck on the M. I'm like, Morrison? No, okay. I don't know how I could forget his name at any point, but that's one of those things that happens to you in front of a microphone. Anyway, but lots of criticism, and there's still criticism of, like I said, of the pacing of these things. But there were people who said outright, no, Trump's constant threats. I mean, he was embarked on an affirmative program of trying to intimidate the Justice Department into not bringing charges. Well, there'll be violence. We'll have World War III on our hands. There'll be an American Revolution, a civil war. People are going to start marching around with guns and shooting people if you dare prosecute me. And they were deliberate about it, and they were always going to be deliberate about it. The timing was going to be slow-moving, but it was always going to be slow-moving. In that sense, you have Merrick Garland correct. That's the kind of person he is. But did it mean that there were no charges brought? Did it mean that the charges brought were less serious or less impactful, or that they wouldn't name Donald Trump as a defendant? Well, apparently not. So he's right about that. Please don't read this as naive, he says. Please, it goes right along with please clap. But, well, don't. Yes, Trump can win, but polls likely reflect voter disengagement long before Election Day. And alarmist obsessing over them risks distracting us from a deeper cause of our crisis. As Jamel Bouie details for the New York Times, a Trump restoration might be facilitated by the Electoral College and the Supreme Court's gutting of voting rights, which help electoral minorities hostile to democracy, such as the MAGA movement, seize power beyond their numbers. In short, if Trump has a path to autocracy in the United States, it probably would run through the counter-majoritarian features of our system, at least as much as through alleged voter apathy about democracy. Yet all the hand-wringing about the autocratic threat rarely involves discussions of majoritarian reforms. The case for panic also rests on reports that Trump allies are aggressively preparing to purge the government of the sort of weak-kneed officials who internally resisted Trump's designs last time. In a second term, some worry, Trump and his consiglieri would not be held back by legal limitations or even court rulings. All that scheming does demand vigilance, but its prospects depend on the prosecutions of Trump and his coup co-conspirators not succeeding. If they do succeed, all the Trumpian bluster about staffing up with lawyers to execute an illegal second-term agenda might quickly evaporate. That success is far from guaranteed, so you need to be vigilant. But so far, the prosecutions have demonstrated unexpected institutional fortitude. Let's not write them out of the story just yet. The impulse to sound alarms, to break voters out of their "it can't happen here" doldrums is understandable, but it's also possible to take this too far, and here it's worth registering an irony. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, the scholar of strongman rule, has noted that a time-tested tactic of authoritarian leaders is to disarm the electorate by suggesting their glorious triumph is inevitable. Authoritarians create a climate where they seem unstoppable, Ben-Ghiat told me. Creating an aura of destiny around the leader galvanizes his supporters by making his movement seem much stronger than it actually is. The manipulation of perception is everything. The aim is to hypnotize voters into forgetting the power and numbers that they possess, persuading them that politics is a hopelessly sordid and disappointing exercise. But that is not the story of the Trump years. The purpose of this isn't to downplay the gravity of the moment. It's to channel anxieties about it in a constructive direction. As Brian Beutler wrote on Substack, excessive public worries about Trump's supposed inevitability bury the all-important truth that popular majorities have regularly, emphatically rejected Trump and all he represents, potentially making the convictions of the anti-Trump movement look feeble in the eyes of swing voters. No more indulging in paralyzing fatalistic nightmares. We need a spirit of guarded and vigilant confidence, one that is fully aware of what's at stake while drawing inspiration from the cognizance that this country has thwarted Trump in the past and will likely do so again. All right, so I'm guilty of some of that as well, and especially in pointing things out. Although, I hope it can be taken in the spirit in which Greg says it can and should be offered. These are problems that Trump could make for us. We need to be aware of them and head them off before they happen. It's entirely possible that Trump could have no interest whatsoever in the outcome of the vote and simply attempt to seize power on his own. But that's where it becomes important to remind ourselves he's got 30% of the country or so that are willing to back him no matter what, but we don't know to what extent that really would play out. They're willing to say they would back him with all of their power. They're certainly willing to vote for him. There's more than 30% of the country that would be willing to cast a vote for him. But it's not entirely clear that there's more than 40-something% of the country that would be willing to cast a vote for him. But 30% back him no matter what. But then when it comes to, will they show up and execute this other things, whatever it is that it would take to seize power? Well, they did show up on January 6th, but then a lot of them went to jail. And a lot of them probably who went to jail thought that there was no way any of the things that they were doing would end with them in jail. And that even if they did, that he would pardon them for it. And that didn't happen either. So there's pretty good reason to believe that it's all, Potemkin in the sense that they're propping, dummies up on the ramparts and saying that we have a strength far in excess of what we actually do have, and when push comes to shove, we're not going to be able to execute. I mean, let's keep it that way, but let's keep in mind that he has been defeated. Institutions have stood against him before. He will try to sweep them away, but it's not clear that he knows how it's done. He can bring in better or more effective voices in trying to help him do that, but it's not clear that that's something that is likely or capable of working. And it certainly has less chance of working the more prepared we are for the number of things that he might try to pull, but we shouldn't assume that they're done deals or that he could make any of them work. We shouldn't assume that he can't, but we shouldn't assume that there's nothing we can do and he's going to ignore the law and he's going to shoot us all if we stand up for the law, because, while that's a risk, I guess we'll have to reverse the field on the people who say, oh yeah, well, show me how many divisions you have. Oh yeah? Well, show me how many divisions you have, because for the most part, they won't leave their farms to come into the city. So I don't know if they can take over the cities after all. They came into one once, and then they all went to jail. Okay, we'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, which direction to take you in next? Golly, I don't know. Let's see. There's, any number of directions to take, as usual, but I'll pick one for you. Let's make it this one here. Something from the New York Times, not on strike tomorrow, but the latest from the new, I was going to say the new triumvirate, but now I remember what strange connotation I gave that earlier in the show, and I don't mean to project that onto Jonathan Swan, Maggie Haberman, and Charlie Savage, but the three reporters at the New York Times teaming up for what at least one of them, Charlie Savage, regards as the stakes coverage of the 2024 election. And here's the latest entry in that. Let's keep up to date with it. I think at some point I'm going to just have to assume that you've read all the rest of them or know the contents of those earlier articles, because I'll never be able to double back and get all of those on the air. A new Trump administration will, quote, come after, unquote, not in time, but, persecute the media, says Kash Patel. Remember, he's still alive, that guy, Kash Patel, which, in the wake of January 6th, in some other countries, perhaps in some other times, would not necessarily be a given. But neither would Donald Trump necessarily be around. The subheader to this one, Donald Trump, who has already promised to use the Justice Department to, quote, go after, unquote, his political adversaries, is expected to install Mr. Patel in a senior role if he returns to power. The urge to say adversaries, for some reason, still with me. All right, What's going on? Who's Kash Patel? If you can't remember, they'll fill you in. A confidant of Donald J. Trump, who is likely to serve in a senior national security role in any new Trump administration, threatened on Tuesday to target journalists for prosecution if the former president regains the White House. Again, as I add usually, through whatever means. That confidant, Kash Patel, who served as Mr. Trump's counterterrorism advisor on the National Security Council and also as chief of staff to the acting Secretary of Defense at the time, made those remarks in a podcast hosted by Stephen K. G.B. Bannon, Mr. Trump's former strategist, during a discussion about a potential second Trump presidency beginning in 2025. And here's the quote: "We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media," Mr. Patel said. "Yes, we are going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out." He added, "We're actually going to use the Constitution to prosecute them for crimes they said we have always been guilty of, but never have." So once again, they'll be trying to co-opt my line of all Republican accusations are confessions and reverse it and say that it's about Democrats and or members of the media. But we're going to come and arrest you and hold you accountable and keep you in prison because you told them the truth about the outcome of Trump's 60 losses in court, which is, in our view, you helping Joe Biden rig and steal elections. You need to go to prison. That's the thought, and that's the thought process, and it's super dangerous, but that's the job right now for Trump surrogates, to go on the air and make the explicit threats that even Trump isn't willing necessarily to spell out quite that clearly. I just do want to point out for you that I think at some point later on, maybe I should just keep reading because I think that the threats get even more explicit, because one of the things that Kash Patel would be up for in a next Trump administration might even be like CIA director. And I saw people saying, and I don't know whether he says it, but that he might, use the power of the CIA, like internally here in the United States, which is straight up illegal, but they don't follow rules or laws or anything. And that you could have CIA operatives showing up at the houses of prominent journalists and citizen opponents and executing arrest warrants and or shooting you on the spot, I guess, for daring to oppose the Trump regime, or at least what Kash Patel's interpretation of the Trump regime is. Anyway, that he'd be using that power, whatever power he's afforded, against you, and of course be promised a pardon if it was in fact illegal. But just wanted to point out that I'm so old. I remember when conservatives used to say openly on social media that they would shoot you if you came to their house to do that. And some of them were even specific enough to say that they would shoot you with their wife's pink shotgun. It used to be acceptable rhetoric on social media for conservatives to say that if you tried this as part of the government, why, that was tyranny, and that was the reason they had guns and they would shoot you and kill you. Of course, we think it's improper to say such things. But as we know, the precedent exists already. That's okay to say on social media and be a prominent Republican conservative commentator at the time and get paid and stuff by lots of people who would allow you to continue to appear on their air. Just wanted to sort of point that out in case you were considering your options. All right, so let's continue on. Earlier in the interview, when asked by Mr. Bannon whether a new administration would, quote, deliver the goods to, quote, get rolling on prosecutions early in a second term, Mr. Patel noted that the Trump team had a bench of, quote, all America patriots. But he said he did not want to name any names, quote, so the radical left-wing media can terrorize them, unquote, i.e. ask them questions. Anyway, you wouldn't know them. They live in Canada. A spokeswoman for Mr. Patel, can you believe he has one? Erica Knight, pointed out that in the same conversation with Mr. Bannon, Mr. Patel said they would, quote, follow the facts and the law. Yeah, right. That's covering your ass. She also sent the New York Times a statement from Patel reading, when President Trump takes office in 2025, we will prosecute anyone that broke the law and end the weaponized two-tier system of justice. But Mr. Trump, who is facing 91 felony charges in 4 separate cases, has already promised to use the Justice Department to go after his political adversaries, signaling that a second Trump term would build on the ways it opened investigations into his enemies during his first term and fully abandon the post-Watergate norm of Justice Department independence. Again, it's interesting to point out that the Cheney political family made its bones on its explicit support of erasing the post-Watergate norms and relitigating Watergate, but they now find themselves adamantly opposed to Donald Trump, who has made that his main project. Interesting. I just want to point out the lesson in all of this is that seemed short term to be in the political interest of the Cheney political family and its allies, but it was a bad precedent for all involved because it kept government operations non-political, non-politicized anyway, and that when you screw with that, you open the door to someone using that same government to tie the noose for you. The super ironic thing about it is that the Cheneys probably did realize that, but always figured that it would be Democrats tying the noose for them, not Republicans. But it can come from anywhere, which is why it's a bad idea to set bad precedent and a bad idea to erase good precedent. Keep the Justice Department depoliticized so that it can't be used to murder you. That if you can't come up with any other motivation, that one will be fine. It's just that Dick Cheney thought it could be used to hang Democrats. And I mean, I don't know where else you're supposed to learn the lesson about why it's important not to erase that line. But Dick Cheney dedicated his political life to erasing that line, and it's being used to threaten him and his daughter with the very fate that it would have prevented had it not been screwed with in the first place. Just got to point that out. Anyway, back to the article. I will appoint a real special prosecutor. Oh, Trump is talking. It's the voice, but I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in history, which is him. Joe Biden is who he says it is, and the entire Biden crime family, Trump said in June. And let me just also link back mentally for a second to Greg Sargent. It ought not necessarily be it should not necessarily be believed, let's say, that erasing the lines is going to carry negative consequences only for the Cheney family. Yes, the Cheney family screwed with the lines and blurred them, and it came back to haunt them. Could not the same thing happen for Donald Trump? Well, he thinks he's a magical figure. His supporters think he's a magical figure who can get away with anything. But, I don't know if anybody ever really thought that about the Cheneys. But I guess that still holds out the possibility that the line blurring here could come back to haunt the Trump gang as well as it did with the Cheney gang. Maybe even more so. I'll just leave that out there as a possibility. Mr. Patel was a relatively unknown Capitol Hill staffer in the early days of the Trump administration. In 2017, that was the early days of the administration that they're talking about. But, so how early? 2017 is where that fits in. But he became an aggressive defender of Mr. Trump against the investigation into whether the president's 2016 campaign conspired with Russians to affect the outcome. Over the next 4 years, he rose to become one of Mr. Trump's most trusted aides and among the most powerful national security officials in the federal government. And that's why his strongest supporters think of him as a magical figure. Kash Patel was a nobody from nowhere in 2017, But he figured out early on, and I mean, Trump was signaling to anyone who would listen, this is how it works in this administration. Kiss my ass and I will notice and raise your prospects. I will turn you from an unknown Capitol Hill staffer into one of the most trusted aides and among the most powerful national security officials in the federal government. If you will just, lick my boot every day in exactly the way I want it licked and do it on television. That I will regard you not as a obscure nobody, but as one of the finest minds America has to offer. In late 2020, Mr. Trump trusted Mr. Patel to such a degree that he asked for him to be installed as a deputy director of either the CIA or the FBI. Trump jettisoned this plan only after senior officials, including the former CIA director Gina Haspel and former Attorney General William Barr, argued forcefully against the move. Barr wrote in his memoir that he told Mark Meadows, then the chief of staff, that having Patel become deputy FBI director would only happen, quote, over my dead body. I am surprised that they passed on that offer. Over the past 3 years, since leaving government, Patel has capitalized on his fame as a Trump insider. He has sold Kash, K-A-S-H, that's his name, by the way, Kash merchandise in an online store and wrote a children's book about the Russia investigation. That's what kids want to read about. By the way, keep that out of our libraries. It's porn. But a children's book about the Russia investigation in which, quote, King Donald is persecuted by a wicked Hillary Queenton. Get it? He's such a clever guy. The story's hero is a wizard named Kash who exposes a conspiracy to tear down King Donald. Mr. Trump declared that he wanted to, quote, put this amazing book in every school in America because he is, after all, at heart, behind putting porn in our kids' schools because he's a child molester himself and he wants to groom them for his pageants. Oh, did I say that? I'm sorry about that. Mr. Patel himself has filed defamation suits against the New York Times, CNN, and Politico. And since leaving government, he has set up a fundraising entity to, quote, fight the deep state and finance lawsuits on behalf of the, quote, everyday Americans who he says have been defamed by what he calls the fake news mafia. Mr. Patel's threats against the media echo warnings from Trump himself. In a Truth Social post in September, the former president wrote, I say up front, openly and proudly, that when I win the presidency of the United States, they and others of the lamestream media will be thoroughly scrutinized for their knowingly dishonest and corrupt coverage of people, things, and events, and other stuff. He added, why should NBC or any of the other corrupt and dishonest media companies be entitled to the use of very valuable, capital A, airwaves of the USA free? Okay. He wants to nationalize television. What a communist. In the same post, Mr. Trump wrote that Comcast, with its one-side and vicious coverage by NBC News, and in particular MSNBC, should be investigated for its country-threatening treason. He's capitalized that, by the way. CTT for short. Country-threatening treason. Which, of course, is what treason threatens. Countries. But never mind that. Earlier this year, Mr. Trump recorded a video for his campaign website in which he promised that a second term would bring the Federal Communications Commission, which regulates broadcast licenses, back under presidential authority as the Constitution demands. Right? Show me in the Constitution where it says Federal Communications Commission. Doesn't say it anywhere, but whatever. He's commander-in-chief of the FCC. A spokesperson for Trump, Stephen Close the Prison Doors Chung, was asked if the former president disavowed Patel's comments. Chung did not answer the question directly, instead referring to a recent public statement from Trump's top two campaign advisors that read, any personnel lists, policy agendas, or government plans published anywhere are merely suggestions. Likewise, all 2024 campaign policy announcements will be made by President Trump or members of his campaign team, not Kash Patel, but policy recommendations from external allies are just that, recommendations. I actually can't argue with that one. Patel is among a small number of former senior national security officials from Trump's first term who have stayed close to him. He was appointed by Trump in June of 2022 to be one of his representatives to interact with the National Archives. That's important to note, whose officials had spent months the previous year trying to retrieve reams of presidential records that left the White House when Mr. Trump did. That's a passive voice way of saying it, including classified material. They left the White House when Trump did. With Trump, at Trump's direction, I guess they're not prepared to say. But wink, yes. Mr. Patel told Breitbart News during the interview in 2022 that he had been on hand when Trump declassified documents before leaving office. That interview attracted interest from federal investigators who in May of 2022 had subpoenaed any remaining classified documents that he hadn't turned over. 3 months later, the FBI executed a search warrant to locate additional classified materials at Trump's Palm Beach club, Pervalago, of course. Mr. Trump's office claimed shortly after the search of the club that he had a standing order in place as president by which materials that left the Oval Office for the White House residents were considered declassified. Several former senior officials, including former Vice President Mike Pence, said they knew of no such order. Despite Trump's obsession with news coverage and his need to stay in the headlines dating back to the 1980s, he has grown increasingly threatening toward the press throughout his life, and particularly since his political campaigns began in 2015. He has talked about changing libel laws to make it easier to sue over coverage. He repeatedly encouraged crowds at his rallies to antagonize the reporters gathered at the back covering the events. Once in office, he began referring to the press in public as, quote, the enemy of the people, language often used by despots globally to justify anti-press crackdowns. He was obsessed with leaks. He wanted aides to interfere with the merger between AT&T and CNN, which covered him rigorously, and he told advisors he wanted officials to obtain phone records of a journalist covering him, a request that apparently was never fulfilled. But Mr. Trump is suggesting there will be results next time. They are a true threat to democracy, and are in fact the enemy of the people, Mr. Trump wrote in September on Truth Social. The fake news media should pay a big price for what they have done to our once great country. But as Greg Sargent might hasten to point out, he once said that China should pay a big price for COVID, and, well, nothing happening there. And instead he gave their leader the most beautiful chocolate cake, although the chronology was reversed. He didn't ask for a refund on the chocolate cake. I'll point that out. There was also something else that reminded me. Oh, yes, right in the last couple of paragraphs where he was obsessed with leaks. Let me just throw this one in quickly because why the hell not? And I don't have a lot of time, so everything that gets thrown in at this point has to be done quickly. Somewhere, there it is. Raw Story had this. Sarah Burris put this together for Raw Story yesterday, and I'll try to read it before all the pop-ups get in the way. Trump wanted a staffer, the headline reads, executed. Wow, that seems like maybe outside of his power directly, but he wanted a staffer executed for leaking that he had been rushed to the White House bunker during the George Floyd protests. This according to one or another of his ex-aides. Let's figure out who it is. Or read who it is. The View's Alyssa Farah Griffin. She's become a Griffin since leaving the administration, but we remember the name Alyssa Farah. She's now landed on her feet, getting paid untold amounts of money for pontificating on The View, which I'd take it if it were offered, but I guess I can't blame her for doing that. Anyway, she's using that opportunity to tell us horrible things about Trump, so I'll take it. It's interesting and entertaining. The View's Alyssa Farah Griffin on Thursday briefly mentioned some of the rage that Donald Trump has shown behind closed doors, throwing ketchup, etc., and how it endangers the United States. It's not just that he's a jerk, it's that he endangers the United States. The co-hosts were blasting Republicans, as usual, for being willing to call Trump a lunatic, but still being willing to vote for him. Joy Behar brought up former Representative Liz Cheney and the bombshell revelations in her recently released book, Oath and Honor. Cheney has made it clear that she believes Trump cannot be allowed to be president again because he's a danger to the country. But The View host said Republican partisans who agree with her assessment are unwilling to vote for a Democrat. One thing she said, it's not just him, it's his enablers, said Behar. Does she say Behar or does she say Bear? Like that. I don't know. I don't watch the show enough to know. The problem arises because they refuse to impeach him. Convict him anyway. And Liz Cheney said if it was an anonymous vote, they probably would have impeached him, but they're scared to lose their job. And in some cases, there's political violence. Don't leave that out. You can't trust that the Republican Party would go against him if he gets the nomination. Case in point, your friend Chris Sununu, New Hampshire governor. He suggested he'd vote for Trump if he was the nominee. Why? Because he said, I'm a Republican, party before country, see? And he said, this is a guy who called Trump bleeping crazy and suggested he should be in a mental institution. That's the Republican Party right now. But it was Griffin who pulled the political fire alarm, describing the dangers of a second Trump administration presents. I will not vote for Donald Trump, she said, and I think that should be a pretty easy thing to say. If you thought the first term of Trump was bad, buckle up. Let me just, by the way, just stop her for a second. This is a person who was in the first administration for Trump. If you thought a first term of Trump was bad, I did, and you were a big part of it. But go on. If you thought a first term of Trump was bad, buckle up. Liz Cheney said we're sleepwalking into dictatorship. I say we're careening into it. So I guess we're moving faster than sleepwalking. Donald Trump told us what to expect in a second term, and we need to listen to it. In the first term, she explained that Trump's worst acts and instincts were stopped due to two major things. First, he had no idea how the federal government worked. And second, he had to get reelected. Or at least he thought he did, right? Those things are not the case in a second election, she explains. He knows how to weaponize the federal government. He doesn't, but he has plans. People who will help him. He's planning to fire civil servants with expertise, nonpartisan people, and staff the government with loyalists. She explained that Trump has an enemies list, which includes the media. He came after MSNBC. He will truly go after the media in a second term, Griffin continued. And we can't take him lightly because I can tell you right now, before I resigned, I was in an Oval Office meeting with a dozen other staffers. And somebody had, he thought, leaked a story about him going to the bunker during the George Floyd protests. And he said that the person who did that should be executed. He's used that terminology with General Milley as well. I cannot set off enough alarm bells about how dangerous he is and that he must be stopped at all costs. The White House later claimed that Trump wasn't being rushed to the bunker. He was just inspecting it, which is really one of the most hilarious things ever. But okay, just chose this time to inspect the bunker. I should be working on dealing with these protests, but I'm inspecting the bunker. Yeah, right, whatever. But okay, so execute Milley, execute the guy who said what was actually happening with the bunker, execute everybody. I guess it's okay to say the path has been cleared, so you can say it too. Just wanted to let you know that. All right, let's see. What else do we sneak in before the end of the day here? I should check around and see if there's anything from the Washington Post that we really need to sneak in under the wire. And I don't think so. But, well, maybe I'll sneak this one in just because it's there and it's Washington Post content and we can't discuss it tomorrow. So it gets prioritized. But it doesn't follow necessarily from what we were just talking about. But this is a piece from November 30th. Yvonne Wingett Sanchez and Amy Gardner, who wrote up from the coverage in the Georgia cases. Trump co-defendant in Georgia who pleaded guilty could testify in other cases. Just want to be on top of that. Prosecutors in Arizona and Nevada have made overtures to Kenneth Chesebro, we now say, who helped organize pro-Trump state electors in 2020. Let's run through what we can in the next minute or so. Kenneth Chesebro, one of former President Donald Trump's co-defendants in the Georgia election interference case, plans to meet with investigators in Arizona and Nevada, where similar probes are underway, according to 3 individuals with knowledge of the arrangements. I like to see more indictments piled one on top of the other, especially state-level indictments, which, again, shows the wisdom of pursuing him both in federal court on a narrow indictment and allowing the states to do their own thing with broader indictments. Chesebro, who pleaded guilty in the Georgia case to a single felony count of participating in a conspiracy to file false documents, has been charged primarily in relation to his 2020 role in organizing slates of pro-Trump state electors. Those electors met and voted in 7 states where Joe Biden had won the presidential election, actions that they hoped would allow Congress to award those states' electoral votes to Trump on January 6, 2021. As part of his pleading, Chesebro avoids prison time but must testify in the Georgia case. Separately, he's also been approached by prosecutors in Arizona and Nevada who are investigating whether the Trump slates of electors that gathered in those states broke any laws, said these individuals, all of whom spoke on condition of anonymity, of course. One said that a grand jury is examining the Nevada case and that Chesebro is expected to testify in front of that panel. He plans to travel to the state this week. And remember, that was a couple of weeks ago. So somewhere there should be actual news reporting of whether he went or not. And I assume that he did. The offices of Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford and Arizona Attorney General Chris Mayes, both Democrats, are leading the respective investigations. Nevada investigators contacted a Chesebro lawyer last week to arrange a meeting. One of the individuals said. Arizona investigators plan to speak to Chesebro in the coming weeks, said 2 others. They want to know the roots of the fake elector theory, one of the individuals said. Robert Langford, a Nevada lawyer representing Chesebro in that case, declined to confirm plans for discussions between prosecutors and his client, but he said, "My client will travel anywhere in the United States to tell the truth about what happened leading up to the events of January 6th. I don't know whether that's a good thing or not. His version of the truth, the real truth, I don't know. The first public hint that Chesebro might be cooperating with other investigators came last week, a couple weeks ago now, when he filed a request with the Fulton County Superior Court judge overseeing the Georgia case to travel to Nevada, Arizona, and D.C. Chesebro's travel is restricted under the terms of his plea deal, so he had to get special permission in order to be able to do that. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, and of course, things happening around the country and around the world, just not through the eyes of the Washington Post tomorrow, but Justice Putnam comes up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and I guess if he wants to, he can still refer to the reporting in the Washington Post for another day. Let's see what he's got on tap.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Oh yeah, right up top, I can see the story of the day that we did not discuss is tops on the list for Justice. Speaker of the House, MAGA Mike Johnson, admitted to being an accessory after the fact. Yes, they're releasing some videotape from January 6th, to whom I don't know, but they're going to be obscuring the faces of these great patriots. How dare they? Stay tuned.